Welcome to Southern Sense Talk Radio with your host, the radio chick, Annie Ubelis. Join Annie on Tuesdays and Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time with an open chat room full of her regulars. And yes, you can even call in. Call 917-889-3675. That's 917-889-3675 to be a part of the action on the phone line. Not able to listen live? Not a problem. You can always catch Annie, the radio chick, and Southern Sense Talk Radio podcasts in archives at southern-sense.com. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Southern Sense the right way.
Ooh, thank God it's Friday. TGIF. We're live on Southern Sense, Blog Talk Radio, High Plains Media, SHR Media, Kinetic Hi-Fi, the Fix FM out of Charleston, South Carolina. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick, Annie. And for a little while, for the first half of the show, I will be by myself, solo, all by my little lonesome. Curtis had a little shindig to take care of, and so I'm rocking and rolling. And guess what? I'm not going to be alone. After all, I have the one, the only, the oh so handsome and erudite, oh so friendly person, Cool Mike, my former co-host, joining me to guest co-host, I guess, today. Good afternoon, Mikey.
Well, couldn't leave you on the street corner, Annie.
Which is probably where you're standing right now, right?
Well, actually, I made it a point to listen today, so I'm glad. No, I'm going to take a break for an hour and a half or so. So I don't mind standing by the future Rush Limbaugh.
And that's right. Thank you so much for reminding me. People can go to toptalkradio.com, and my smiling face is still sitting at number 16 out of the top 100 on talk show hosts. So check it out. Also check out our website, which is the name of the show. Put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. Well, Mike, we got ourselves a handful of stuff going on today. Plus, we've got two fantastic guests. I know I'm going to pronounce her last name wrong, and I have to apologize ahead of time. She will be calling in at quarter after the hour. Anne McElhenney. She and her husband are the producers behind the Gosnell movie. If everyone remembers the stories that were up a couple of years ago about Kermit Gosnell, the abortionist that is now serving several life sentences in Pennsylvania for abortions, illegal abortions, as well as murder from some of his patients. They'll be joining us at the first part of the show. And at half past the hour, we're going to have former Army reservist Captain Yancey Crothers. He has great books out. He's got a 5-part series on medics, which is really, really fun and interesting, as well as his own biography in Northeast Eden, and he'll be joining us, and I'm telling you, this guy's a character. But that said, Mike, you know we start each and every show with a dedication to a fallen hero, and today is no different. Today's dedication is going to go out to Deputy Sheriff Paul Clark of St. Francis County, Missouri. His end of watch was just recently, on Monday, July 4th of 2016, while the rest of us were celebrating the birth of our nation on Independence Day. This gentle giant passed. And this is from the Officer Down Memorial page, which you can find at odmp.org. Deputy Sheriff Paul Clark, St. Francis County Sheriff's Office, Missouri, age 55, tour of duty, 18 years, badge number 963. His cause of death was vehicular assault. The date of the incident, though, was October 27th of 2015. And this reads, Deputy Sheriff Paul Clark died from complications of injuries sustained on October 27th, 2015, when he was intentionally struck by a stolen vehicle near Dislodge, Missouri. He had conducted a traffic stop of a second vehicle on Highway 67 near Highway Y and was attempting to identify the occupants. Deputy Clark asked one of the occupants, who was unable to produce identification, to walk back to his police car with him. The man suddenly jumped into a truck that was parked nearby and attempted to flee. The man swerved towards Deputy Clark, striking him and throwing him several feet into a ditch on the shoulder of the road. The man, who was wanted on federal probation violation warrant, was arrested after leading other officers in a pursuit. Deputy Clark suffered a broken back as a result of the incident. He suffered complications as a result of the injury and died at home on July 4, 2016. This is from the Daily Journal online. St. Francis County Sheriff's Department suffered the loss of one of their longtime deputies. Deputy Paul Clubber Clark died unexpectedly while at home with his family. Sheriff Dan Bullock said it was a tremendous loss for the department. Everyone knows him by Clubber, and he was a veteran police officer for the county. He also worked for Park Hills Police Department for a few years before he came to the county. He was a real good officer and did his job. He also had been a really good friend and involved in Shop with a Cop and Backstoppers. Bullock added Clark would do anything to help the sheriff's department get things done. Most recently, he had been doing civil service, but over the years, he had been a road officer and had done a little bit of everything, of all the different positions throughout the years, Bullock said. He had had back surgery on Thursday last week, and he was on leave for it. He was actually home Monday morning and was sitting in his recliner when it happened. Bullock said the ambulance crew worked for an hour trying to revive him and rushed him to the emergency room, but he didn't make it. The sheriff added he wasn't sure what the cause of death is at this time, but is confident an autopsy will be performed. Clark was married and has 2 kids. He was hired into the St. Francis County Sheriff's Department on August 19 of 1998. St. Francis County Dare Officer Deputy Gary Carver worked closely with Clark and said he thought Clark served as a police officer for 25 years or more. He was just a decent guy who was honest to a fault, Carver said. You could call him at 2 a.m. for a roof leaking or something, and Paul is the kind of guy who would come out to be right there to help you out. If you needed anything, he's the guy. If he got it, or if he could find it, or if he could help you with it, he's the guy who would do that. Carver added, Clark would be missed by everybody. He was well-liked and extremely hard worker. He was an honest guy, and again, if someone needed a pick-me-up or some help around the department, Paul is the guy who would step in and lend a hand. I know his family would miss him, and Paul had a lot of friends that were there Monday morning, and those folks are going to miss him too. He's the kind of quality person that you would want as a neighbor. His loss was very unexpected, and he was with me for 3 days the week before, and he had the surgery coming up, Carver said. All he wanted to do was recover and get back to work. We talked about it for those 3 days we spent in the car together, and he said, I want to get this surgery behind me, and I just want to get back to work. That's the kind of work ethic and value that Paul had. Recently it was discovered that Clark had a broken back as a result of the injuries. Today's show is dedicated to Sheriff Clark. It is also dedicated to all of those first responders out there, those men and women that every day don their uniforms, go out there, protect, and serve, selflessly. We also dedicate it to all the brave men and women that serve in our armed forces, from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror. And we dedicate to them with this song, My Name is America, by Todd Allen Harrington. God bless them all.
In the grip of oppression, I fought for my liberty. I paid with the blood of my people. Freedom has never been free. Now my door's always open to dreamers and friends. When I'm attacked, I protect and defend, because my name is America. up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. My strength was not taken from others. Others gave it to me. They believe in the virtues I stand for, my respect for humanity. Now I'm challenged by tyrants who envy my power, but their vicious deeds become my finest hour, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. For those who need me, I'll always be here. For those who will harm me, I'll face without fear. But I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. I'm America, yes, America is my name. It's my
Todd Allen Herndon, My Name is America. And you can download that for free by going to his website, toddallenshow.com. Check it out. All right, we're here back with Southern Sense on Blog Talk Radio, High Plains Media, SHR Media, Kinetic Hi-Fi, the Fix FM out of Charleston, South Carolina, on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, and forget about it. Just go to our website, which is the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick, Annie, and today, guest co-hosting with me is the one, the only, the coolest cat of all cool, Mikey. Woo, we got so much to go over today.
Annie, I just sent you a link. Todd Allen is coming to Grand Rapids, and he's going to be here on Sunday the 7th. I'm going to put 2 tickets in the mail. Hopefully it'll arrive quicker than the last time I said I'm going to drop it in the mail. But, yeah, this is, and actually, the one a couple years ago, it was a great concert, but just not a lot of people showed up. So the pastor and the sponsors asked me to help partake in it. So I think we're going to have a pretty good show.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Then I better give him a call and then see if I can get him on the show, and maybe we can give those tickets away to a listener.
Yeah, hey, that'd be great. That'd simply be outstanding. So, oh, man, it's good to be back, Annie. You know, for a while I was so busy, I never had time to really listen. It's good. The last show I really realized when we logged off just how much I missed. Man, you get the guests, boy. They're the. I really, really, really enjoyed, I'll tell you, is listening to, I can't remember his name, but when he talked about the seals, and just, it is unbelievable that we have to bring a guest on a radio show in order to find out the truth in our very untransparent government.
Well, I'm waiting for our guest to call in, and I'm not sure what number she's going to be calling from. Matter of fact, it never fails, Mike. You know, you give them the show phone number, and they end up calling in on my cell phone. But let's hope that this is our guest here, and I do believe it might be. Good afternoon, and I know I'm going to mispronounce your last name, McElhinney?
McElhenney, very
McElhenney.
good. No, that's perfect.
that was close.
McElhaney, it's simple.
It's very good. Yes, like the Tabasco sauce.
Well, what do you expect from a half Italian, half German? I don't get the Irish that often.
Yes, exactly. There you go. There you go.
Well, you and your husband did a lot of hard work, and you put together the movie about Kermit Gosnell. And, I was on your website and just reading some of the stuff that you guys have gone through just to get the facts out. And I got to say, God bless you for putting this together. It has to be told, the story.
Oh, thank you. It has. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's actually, it's an honor to get to tell this story. It's very, as you say, it's very, very important. What surprises us continuously is the number of people who still have never heard of him, have never heard of Gosnell and what he did and what happened at 3801 Lancaster. Right now, funny, we're actually finishing up a book about Gosnell that'll be coming out in January, published by Regnery. And the film hopefully will be coming out soon too. But it's an extraordinary, extraordinary story.
Well, what I found amazing is you have yourself up on Indiegogo for the project, and let you know that on the show description, the majority of people that listen to the show listen to the podcast later, and all they have to do is just go to the show description as they're listening and click on any of the links. It'll take them directly to the movie website as well as your Indiegogo and your Facebook page. And matter of fact,
campaign, yes, and the Indiegogo campaign is ongoing. We're still receiving donations to the cause, so people can still give at gosnellmovie.com. They just go directly gosnellmovie.com. But as you say on the podcast, you already have all the links there.
Yeah, and actually, you got a couple of dollars of mine last night, too. So I clicked on it.
Oh, thank you very much. We appreciate that very, very much.
Well,
thank you, man.
My co-host knows that I am known for putting my money where my mouth is and when it's needed. So I hope that others listening in will take a moment, because they can give as little as $1, or they can give as much as they want.
As much as, at $10,000, as people have done, by the way. We've had people from 28,000 people from 27 countries have given $2.1 million, $2.2 million, I think it is actually now. And the film, as I said, is complete, but obviously with marketing the film is going to be a whole other expense on itself. So we're still receiving donations to this as you said, to this extraordinary story of this man who, ran this clinic for 30 years in Philadelphia, in a progressive, as they like to call it, a very progressive state, in the city of Philadelphia. It's not a backwater of any kind. It's a very, very modern city. And here's what he did. He for 30 years, he delivered babies alive. And when they were alive and born and crying and trying to live, he stabbed them in the back with a scissors. He cut their necks with the scissors. And he did this for 30 years. And no one ever knows. The grand jury report in the case said no one will really ever know just how many children he murdered. He's in prison today for murdering 3, but that's a sample of what he really did. I mean, he has 3 life sentences, so he won't be getting out anytime soon. But he possibly, we certainly are calling him America's biggest serial killer. And for that, there is no doubt at all that he is America's biggest serial killer. And he's America's biggest serial killer that no one has ever heard of.
What is amazing is this man had complaints going far back as 1989. And there was complaint after complaint after complaint. He even had people swear out testimony about him. And still, Philadelphia and Pennsylvania did nothing. He also had clinics in Delaware and Louisiana.
It's quite extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary, that he, and what's really, as you say, what's very interesting, for 17 years, so for 17 years before the raid that eventually caught up with him, which was nothing to do with abortion, it was a drug raid, but for 17 years prior to that night, he was running this pill mill, he was, murdering these children. He was getting complaint after complaint. 2 women died. Karnamaya Monger died. Samika Shaw died. And still, for 17 years, the Department of Health in Pennsylvania chose not to inspect the premises for 17 years. And as you say, the complaints were piling high of all kinds of things, any one of which, if it had been checked out, they would have found the bodies of the babies piled up in the basement as he kept them in freezers and in fridges where people were eating their lunch, and where he kept the severed feet of some of the babies in jars in the same place where people had their peanut butter sandwiches. So, but they didn't bother for 17 years. And one of the things that I often say when I'm speaking about this to audiences is that, while I am extremely disturbed by the evil of Dr. Kermit Gosnell, and I am, shook to my core by that, I find it actually more disturbing that the good folk, the nice folk living and working in Harrisburg at the Department of Health, who had nice homes and children and suburban lives and went to golf classes and whatever else they did in their lives, allowed this to go on and did nothing about it. I mean, they are the really scary ones because they colluded with him in a way. I mean, the governor, by the way, the governor of Pennsylvania at the time when Gosnell was operating, decided that they shouldn't have any inspection of these abortion clinics. They didn't want to put any, and he was a Republican governor, Governor Ridge, decided they didn't want to put up any barriers, as they call it, toward women's, right to choose or whatever. And because of that, you had these two women died, Samika Shaw and Carnamaya Munger, and the thousands and thousands and thousands of babies who lived and breathed in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, who tried to live, and their stories are told in the book and they'll be told in the film. They're heroic stories that we believe very strenuously are going to change minds and hearts.
What really boggles my mind is not only have their complaints going back as far as 1989, but Gosnell was never certified as a gynecologist or a Jesus,
Correct.
I got my teeth in backwards. In obstetrics, I can't even say the word.
Obstetrics, yes.
Thank you.
Obstetrics and gynecology, absolutely. In obstetrics and gynecology, he was never qualified. So in order to run an abortion clinic, you have to have an OBGYN on the premises. He was not an OBGYN. People knew that, and nothing was done. Nothing was done about that. He still continued to operate with impunity. And the stories, as I said, the stories coming out of this clinic, the stories that are coming out now in our research in the book and talking to people who worked there, people who were patients there, and to the police officers who had the gruesome task of investigating the story, it was extraordinary. I mean, the place was filthy. There were cats walking through the premises. There were cats in the procedure rooms. The doctor himself, who, as you said, wasn't an OBGYN, was walking around eating breakfast cereal with his surgical gloves on in the rooms where these procedures were going on. Women were screaming. I don't want to say too much on the radio, just, at whatever time of the day it is with you. I'm actually in Ireland right now, so it's the evening time here, but I know it's earlier with you. But honestly, it's breathtaking that this went on for so long, and what really is clear to us, and it's one of those things that people say to us a lot of times, oh, he was an outlier, oh, he's an exception. Absolutely not. Not for a second do I think he's an exception. I think if you have a set of circumstances, that allowed him to operate the way he did for that length of time, you're going to have these kind of people doing this kind of thing in this environment where the authorities don't care.
Well, that's the problem we have with places like Planned Parenthood, like this clinic that Dr. Gosnell was working at, and 75% of the abortions that are performed are on black babies. So where's Black Lives Matter outrage?
Absolutely correct. You are absolutely 100% right. Black Lives Matter. I agree that Black Lives Matter, but I'm not impressed with the Black Lives Matter movement, who don't seem to care at all about the majority of those children slaughtered in Gosnell's clinic who were black children, and where is the outrage for them? Where is the outrage? And, you'd be a bit more sympathetic to this movement if they managed to acknowledge these innocent lives who were born alive, who lived and met this horrific fate. And also there are brothers and sisters across the nation who are being aborted every day in America. In America, which has the most extraordinary laws that only can be compared to places like Pakistan and China, where you can have an abortion in the United States of America up until 9 months. And I have to say, for me, that was a big learning curve. In the state of Pennsylvania, it's up till 6 months. And plenty of your listeners are listening, and they know well, like they've had a sister or a friend or themselves or their mother or whoever, and they've seen that person 6 months pregnant, and they know what 6 months pregnant looks like. No one looks at a woman 6 months pregnant and says to them, "How is the fetus?" No one ever says that. People look at a woman who's 6 months pregnant, and they talk about the baby and what does the baby think about things and how is the baby doing, and baby's listening to music, and baby is being spoken to at that stage. So, this is the extraordinary thing that I think is a gift of this horrific story, is that we get to tell people that mightn't otherwise know, first of all, what abortion actually is, and secondly, what the laws in America are. Because I can tell you that in this case, the two ADAs, the two assistant district attorneys who investigated this case, Joanne Pescatori and Christine Wexler, two very smart women, you can imagine yourselves now, very, very smart, young women, both mothers, neither of whom knew that you could abort a baby at 6 months legally in Pennsylvania. They didn't know the law. So if they didn't know the law, trust me, most people in Pennsylvania don't know the law. And when they do find out what the law is, and they do find out that it's legal in Pennsylvania to abort a baby at 6 months, they don't like it. People don't like it, and they think it's wrong.
Yeah, I like the way people parse it. They say, for here in the state of South Carolina where I am, it's up to 20 weeks. And we're trying to push that back. And I would like to see it at 0, honestly. That's my personal opinion.
Absolutely. I know. But I think, and I've spoken obviously because of this movie, and I've met a lot of people in the pro-life movement, every victory is also still a victory. And every life saved by pushing that number back is still a life saved. And all the things that the pro-life movement are trying to do in order to save lives, are good. So, the ultrasounds are a good idea. The 24-hour counselling is a very good idea. Pushing the dates back is a very good idea. And, there's a culture of death in America, unfortunately, and, it's going to take a lot to educate people. But I can tell you, our movie is finished, and we have shown it to a number of people. And I can say this. When it happened at the time, I didn't tell anyone because I didn't have permission. But Dennis Prager himself said it on his own radio program. Dennis Prager has seen the film, and he wept. And people weep when they see the film, and people, obviously Dennis Prager would be of the same mind as yourself on this issue, but other people who would be very pro-choice or think that they're pro-choice have watched the film and have changed their mind, and that's the power of the film, and that's the power of the story.
Well, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking back, because recently a member by marriage to my family, young lady decided to have an abortion rather than having the child. And my husband and I were up there in age. He's a senior citizen. We're both collect Social Security. And I said, listen, I would adopt that child rather than see her aborted. And
in a heartbeat.
And unfortunately, she went against what our wishes were. And I says, I don't care if I'm going to be 90 years old while she's graduating high school. I don't care. It's a life, and I want to see that life preserved. Yeah. Now, Ann, I don't know if you have time, because we do have a caller coming in. Let me bring this individual on the air. Area code 816.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. 816, you're on the air live with Southern Sense. I'm your host, Annie, the radio chick, and our guest is Ann. And Ann, I'm not even going to try your name again.
Ann McElhenney. You're all right. You're all right.
To whom am I speaking?
Annie, you know who this is. Most definitely you know who this is.
Thomas, you call in so infrequently now, I don't recognize your phone number. I recognize the area because, Thomas, you got a comment or a question? Because she's only going to be with us for a few moments.
Well, I definitely got a comment, being that you know where I stand on this issue. Mm-hmm. You're talking about Kermit Gosnell and all these individuals like that. Kermit Gosnell, he's just one of the little imps, because and you know this based on what you saw in that clinic, or all the information that came out, even today, based on that movie, and even today, you look at the pro-abortion industry, and they're getting bold and brazen. In fact, the Democratic Party just added to their platform basically a point for unlimited government-funded abortions, not only in the United States, but they added provisions to repeal the Hyde and the Helms Amendment that restricted our country giving abortion money to other nations in Mexico. My whole comment is this, because this is personal to me. There's many ways we approach this. Right, but as someone who, because my mom, when my mom was pregnant with me in 1974, my mom refused an abortion. They moved on to the other option. I was put in foster care, and I was surgically sterilized as a baby at 6 months old because my mom refused permission for them to sterilize me with her permission. So this whole argument, pro-choice, a women's right, and all this stuff, where was my choice? So with this movie, Kermit Gosnell, I applaud you for exposing that
Thank you.
And that man he played on his own community, because everybody knows that abortion affects the black community.
More than you're so right. No, you're absolutely right, and thank you so much for calling in. But we're thank you very, very much, and go online and give us $1. Give us $1 at gosnellmovie.com. But thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
There are a lot of stories that we've had on the show, women that were births from rapes. Their parents did not abort them. There's so many reasons why the human life is sacred, and I'm glad that this movie is done, because the media paid absolutely no attention at the trial. They were all over there at
absolutely not.
Jodi Arias. They were at that
Jodi
trial.
Arias. Absolutely. Everyone, the whole country knows who Jodi Arias is. Everyone in America knows her name. They could describe her. They could pick her out of a lineup. No one still, to this day, the number of people who actually still know who he is very small, and we're about to change all that. But mostly we're going to be, what we're going to try to achieve with the movie and with the book is that the children's lives that were lost will not be forgotten, and that they will be forever memorialized in this movie and in this book. And we think we will change hearts and minds, and we already have. So that's the task.
Well, I thank you for doing that. It is very important that we get his name back out there on the front page. And I am glad that you and your husband had the courage to go forward with this movie. And I know you had a lot of hurdles. And
thank you.
You tell a story, you and your husband tell a story that he's got your cell phone numbers, and he's constantly calling you with these weird things.
Yes.
This man has an ego that is unbelievable.
Yeah. He phones us, and he writes, and he writes, and he phones a lot. And, the phone rings, and you can hear they have this introduction that's from the prison, and it's Kermit Gosnell phoning again, because I don't think anyone else is talking to him. So, but it's disturbing, and it's funny. The police officer who put him away said, you'll hear from him until the day he dies. So, because we went to the prison, we visited with him. But everyone can read all about it. It'll be, as I said, it'll be in the book. We're just finishing the book right now, and it's coming out in January. And the film, as I said, hopefully will be out as soon as possible, and we will let you know as soon as we have information on that. But I would encourage anyone who feels strongly about this, give us $1. Just give us $1 at gosnellmovie.com or whatever you can afford, because we're up against it with, you can imagine in Hollywood, the effort for this film not to be seen is very strong.
Oh, I
have
imagine.
A question. All these years, I mean, of having complaints and reports, and rather than ask you how dumb and blind the people are who are in enforcement, but can you let us know how eventually I mean, after so many decades, they walk in his door and just arrest him, or?
He was caught. The only reason he was caught was that he also sold prescription drugs illegally. So he operated what they call a pill mill. He sold OxyContin and Percocet to drug dealers, and he was caught in a drug bust. So that an undercover cop, a wonderful man called Detective Jim Wood, was the undercover drug detective who came upon him in a routine drug bust, and then found the feet, and said there was something wrong. Could see the bodies in the basement, and started asking questions. And that's how it all started. Yeah, that's how it all started. God. Unfortunately, I have got to go right now, but I am so glad I got a chance to talk to you guys, and I really appreciate you guys' support, and thank you for your donation. And let's talk again closer to the time that the movie comes out.
Oh, definitely. We will be in contact. Matter of fact, I'm looking forward to getting my copy of the movie. So, yeah, I really do want to have you back on, especially with the book.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, the book is extraordinary. It really is. Even the editor is saying she thinks it's extraordinary. It's really a page-turner. Every page is very, very shocking. God bless.
God bless you, too. And people, check out it's gosnellmovie.com. The links are on the show page here. Just click on the links, and you can go to the Indiegogo website or a Facebook page or to the movie itself page. Check it out, make a donation, and definitely when the movie is released, get your butt to the theater and see it. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you. God bless. Bye-bye.
Take care. All right. Oh, man, what a great guest. Now, we are waiting for our second guest to call in. If you are on the line, please make sure you place your finger against number 1 on the dial pad, and I'll be glad to bring you on air. Oh, Michael, what an amazing woman. She and her husband had the courage to go and make this movie. And I think this may be our other guest calling in, and I do believe this is Yancey Carruthers?
Yes, I'm here.
Ah, fantastic. Man, we go from one fantastic guest to another. Oh, geez. I just hope a lot of people now are going to go out to see this movie about Kermit Gosnell. But, Yancey, I got to tell you, I read 2 of your books. I read Northeast Eden and your last medic book on World War II. Man, can you write. I'm jealous.
Well, I would just ask that you tell a few 100,000 of your closest friends.
Well, I got to tell you that
these memoirs, they come straight from the heart. Northwest of Eden actually got its name because in biblical geography, the Garden of Eden was supposed to be located where all the rivers met, and the Tigris and the Euphrates, 2 of those rivers that still exist today, actually meet somewhere south of Talil, Iraq. So everything northwest of that is the country of Iraq, basically in the land between those 2 rivers. So that's sort of where I came up with the name. But it's a very personal story to me because I wrote it while I was living it. I didn't actually know how it would end or if it would end. And it's been a lot of fun to write these things, and I just enjoyed it.
Well, it is an absolutely excellent book, and people can go to it by going to your website, which is very simple. It's your name, yanceycarruthers.com. And I'll let you know that the majority of people that listen to the show listen to the podcast later on. So all they have to do is look at the show description, click on the link, and go directly to your website. So hopefully it'll help drive some book sales.
Hey, I'm all about that. Really, what I wanted to do with the object of writing this book in the first place, I didn't intend for it ever to be read. I started out writing a diary during my first deployment to Iraq. It was about 2005, and I wrote some very personal things in that, and it's still personal to me. And that part never made it into Northwest of Eden. But when I found out I was going back again for a second trip, I said, I have to do this a little differently. I have to write this down so that the rest of the people in the United States, people who would never dream of going to that area, and I don't recommend it as a vacation spot, it's kind of awful, but these people would be able to understand exactly what we went through. So I wrote the good and the bad and the ugly, and there were just so many emotions that were attached to that. But I wrote that book while I was living it, so it's a little bit different than I think a lot of things that a lot of the books out there that people write.
Well, you have 20 years experience in the Army Reserves, and you served as a medic as well as a trauma nurse. And while you were stationed in Iraq, you were second in command at that facility. When you came home, you threw away your medical knowledge and skills. You just put it to the side and says, I don't want to do this anymore, and became a diplomat in the State Department. What a career change.
Well, it's interesting. The folks who were my colleagues while I was a diplomat, they used to say, what on earth does being a nurse have to do with being a diplomat? And I just laughed, and I thought, well, you obviously don't know anything about being a nurse. It's a people profession. So I wasn't necessarily putting aside my entire skill set. But you're absolutely right. A lot of the clinical knowledge and the things that I had gained over the years, I came back from Iraq in late 2008, and I went right back to my job. Well, I took a couple of months off because the Army was paying me my built-up leave. I painted my house. I put a new roof on my house. That was the way I coped with sort of getting back to reality. But when I finally got back on the job, and my regular job was, well, I hesitate to call it a regular job. I worked on a helicopter. So we would fly out in the middle of the night to car accidents and sometimes small hospitals to pick people up and bring them to larger hospitals, whatever we need to do. I live in a very rural area, so we're always doing these. Basically, it's not really air rescue. It's more like go get. And that can be very intense. And I sort of saw the writing on the wall and said, this is not something that I want to do when I'm 55 or 60 years old. I've reached, what's a very specialized profession, but there's no promotion potential there because it is such a specialized thing. So I did this not necessarily all at once. I saw it coming. I was looking out in advance and said, I got to find something else. I'm going to do this. I loved my job, my medical job, the day I left it. And I think that's the time when a person really needs to start shopping for a different job. Don't wait until you're tired and angry and bitter and you're fed up and you're really not a good employee at that point anyway. And I certainly am not if I let myself reach that point. So why not start looking for something else that's going to satisfy my needs while I still have something to offer, while I'm still giving my 100% to the job that I have. I think that's what people are looking for.
Well, that is the truth. And people don't understand that, even though you are, serving not in the field of battle, you still end up suffering from PTSD also.
I think that's sort of very individual experience. I have a lot of different feelings about PTSD in general, and maybe some of them aren't exactly mainstream. But having been to war twice, and I didn't get involved in ground combat. I got shot at once. I wasn't even aware that it was happening until the next day. Most of the things that I saw that were these horrific things were hospital related. I'm standing at the door of a facility that's reasonably safe, and the flight medics and the ground medics would fly in or drive in with, some soldier or civilian, even children, in, some horrific condition, and basically they say, fix it. And the more times a person has to see that, it stays with you. I can't describe how you can get an image in your head, and you put that in a catalog, and it just adds to all the other images in your head in my head that I didn't want to necessarily look back on, but those just pile up and they pile up. So I don't think anyone that's ever been to any kind of a wartime experience or traumatic experience comes out of it on the other side the same person they were when they went in. And that's really the process I was trying to illustrate in Northwest of Eden. Because when I go back and I look at some of those passages in that book, I think, wow, what an arrogant fool I was. I mean, at the beginning of the story, I'm thinking, I got this. I'm good. I'm super nurse. I've got this. I'm under control, and I got my team, and we're doing these things. And by the end of the book, I look at that and I think, wow, I was just really just as insecure as everybody else. I mean, we were all just trying to cope. We were trying to get by. And that's what I wanted people to understand was that process. It's not necessarily a post-traumatic, well, it is a post-traumatic process because the trauma happened and post means after, so I guess we're after that. But it's just sort of the ability to wrap one's head around all of those things that we saw and then try to come here and reassemble a normal life out of that. And most vets do fine with that. They come back and they put their lives back together and they figure things out. But none of us are the same people we started out. I don't think that's something anyone can expect. And there's a few folks that have can't manage to get their life back together, and they have, sort of a dysfunctional relationship with reality, and that's, I think, what we would call PTSD. But I think everybody that experiences a trauma or lives through that kind of experience comes out the other side a little bit burned.
No, it's funny, though, because now I've been retired since '96, and sometimes I come across some of my old memo books and I'll flip it open and go, was I really that crazy? Did I really do some of those silly things? And you're right. You're young. You are arrogant. You think that nothing is ever going to happen to you. And then when you come out the other end, you go, oh, my God, I was just so lucky. How the heck did I manage to walk away from that? And you're right. You have images that just go into your mind that just never leave. I mean, it's like the first time someone came at me with a knife, I almost shot him. But I saw him drop the knife in a split second, and it's an image that forever in my mind will always stay. And I'm talking about just being as a cop, but being in combat zone all the time.
It's okay that these images change because that they stay with you. It's okay that stays with you. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong. It means that defining moment in your life is sort of seared into your brain, and it causes you, influences your future decisions because, you're going to think, okay, based on that situation that happened to me, I now understand it. I see it over and over. I process it. So, in some ways, that can be a very healthy thing. And as long as it doesn't, dominate a person's life and you shut your eyes and that's the only image that you see. But otherwise, I think those things, they make us reflect on who we are as a person and the things that we've been through. It's just tough to kind of remember to pay the electric bill and believe that that's important when, one time in my life, staying alive was what was important and keeping other people alive, which is on a whole different level of responsibility.
Well, this is what people fail to understand, because as you're serving overseas or you're serving away from your home, even if it is the United States, people don't realize that you still have to pay the mortgage, pay the electric bill, make sure the kids have clothing and food and whatever other responsibilities. You still have those responsibilities on top of doing your job as a soldier.
Right, and I think that that brings us to a great point about how military spouses and the folks that are left behind really do serve as well. They're not serving in uniform, but my wife kept everything together. Basically, she took over all the duties that I was doing in the home, and we had a couple of rental properties too, which she didn't know anything about fixing anything. So she was trying to, to keep her head above water with all that. Basically, I just dumped our entire life onto her, the life that we had been sharing as the work of two people, and all of a sudden there's a big job vacancy there. And the only thing I really had to worry about as a soldier, of course, it occupied my thoughts sometimes, thinking, okay, is she doing okay back there? I mean, we communicated pretty well, which is wonderful. But then all I really had to worry about is, getting through my day, doing my job, keeping those people alive, staying alive myself. That was all I really had to worry about. Even if I picked up the phone and called her and said, hey, I'm doing okay, I'm fine, 10 minutes after I hang up the phone, she's going to worry because she doesn't know. There's no real comfort in checking in once in a while and saying, hey, I'm safe, I'm doing well. I mean, the spouses that are back home have got a tough job, and I really respect that.
Well, I kind of figured that my ex-husband had it pretty damn good because he was a Marine and he was in the reserves, and he would take off for his whatever, and I'm the one who did the bookkeeping, the bill paying, the repairs. This man could not boil a pot of water. So Thankfully, my parents raised me to be a handy person, so I kind of spoiled him. Maybe I should give, the spouses a class, like, how to hammer a nail, how to fix wiring. Maybe I've got a new profession in front of me.
Well, it's exactly that. I mean, I think as any sort of family unit does, I mean, everybody sort of picks out the task that they're accustomed to, and the things when something needs fixing at my house, doesn't make any difference what it is. I mean, one of my kids is going to hand it to me and say, "Here, Dad, fix this." They don't go to Mom for that. They go to Mom for other things. If they're hungry and they want something to eat, better go to Mom because I can't really cook that well, or you don't like what I cook or whatever. So, I mean, we all kind of get those tasks and we figure out who does what. And then all of a sudden, the person, well, here's the thing. Our spouses do the things that we're the least comfortable with doing, and vice versa. So when one of us takes ourselves out of the equation, then all of a sudden the other person is wearing all the hats. And it's not the hat, and then the extra hats they just got are not necessarily the ones that they feel comfortable wearing. Something has to be fixed. Got to figure it out.
Yeah, and then where's the money if you have to hire a handyman?
Absolutely.
But
right. So there's a lot of these worries.
Yeah, a lot. I could understand. God forbid the car breaks down too. Oh my goodness, who helps you fix the car if you're just the only one there? It's so many worries on both of the spouse's shoulders, and then of course the kids also have to face the stress of it too, because suddenly now you can run to Dad for this or run to Mom for that. Now there's only just one person to run to for everything. So how did your kids handle it?
Yeah, and and these kind of things, the multiple deployments, the year after year after year. I was away from my family for about 3.5 years in total, maybe 4, and that was over a 6 or 7 year period. And these are, this is a type of thing where, kids are growing up. They're the age, my kids would have been, 3 and 5 the first time I left, I think.
Wow.
So I mean, there were periods, there's a whole part of my children's childhood that I wasn't there for. Try to be involved from a distance and all that kind of thing. We all know that that's just a consolation prize. And my kids are now teenagers. I've got my oldest daughter's an adult. She's got her own career, and she's doing great. But, I mean, there's still a part of their lives that I was gone for. And my relationship with my kids is never going to be like it should have been had I not chose to make that, that time and, run off to war. So, I mean, I think that's something we've also got to appreciate about our vets and our spouses is that, not only are we sacrificing at the time, but then later on sacrificing the relationships. And now the trade-off to that is I've made some wonderful friendships. I've got some friends that are just as close as family. I mean, so everything's a trade-off, but you just can't have it all. And, that was a tough thing. Kids bounce back. They do okay. At least you think they're doing okay. And then, years later, you realize maybe they weren't doing okay. We gotta just do what we can. And nothing I can do to go back and fix that. I just got to move forward.
Oh, absolutely. And your book is an excellent read. I'm telling everyone to check it out, Northwest of Eden. One of the hardest things we see with the vets coming back is transferring back into civilian life. And I fortunately live in an area that's heavy military, both active and retired. It's known as the Tri-Command because we've got Paris Island, a Marine Recruit Depot nearby. We've got the Marine Corps Air Station. We've got the Naval Hospital. So, it's easier coming into an area like here because you've got people to lean on. But going into some of these other places where you go from being in the military structure and then now you're out there on your own, you have to take care of everything on your own where you're not living under a military structure. How hard was it for you to come back into civilian life?
Well, I mean, I was reserved pretty much the whole time, my whole 20 years. But after 9/11, obviously that changed, and I kept leaving and coming back, leaving and coming back. So always I would come back to life, and the first time I came back, I expected it to be exactly the way it was when I left, and it wasn't true at all. I mean, the world changes around us, and we change, on a separate course, and you jam those things back together, and they don't always fit well. I think what a lot of people underestimate is that the military is one of the most socially supportive environments in the world, and one would think okay, I show up for work, and I'm at work, and I didn't shine my boots this morning. Okay, I'm dating myself because we don't shine our boots anymore. But, there's part of my uniform that wasn't right, or didn't dress myself properly, or got a pant leg sticking out of my boot or something. I'm not going to make it 5 minutes before somebody's going to yell at me about that. You think, well, how on earth can that be socially supportive? When every little thing that I do is scrutinized by any sort of leadership, well, you're not wearing the right uniform today. Why didn't you press your stuff? You look like a ragbag. And that doesn't sound very socially supportive. But it really is, because what it means is that military leaders, when I was a leader of people, I had to ask questions of my people, like, are you getting enough to eat? Are you sleeping? How's the home life? Is everything stable on the home front? I had to ask questions that people would not have dreamed of asking a civilian employee. Well, half of them would probably get sued. But I had to really to get into their lives, because if I had a soldier that had something going on at home, I needed to know about that, because our job was 24/7. So if they had something going on, I needed to know that, so I could kind of try to make an accommodation for that. Everything okay? If my soldiers are not eating, then I need to find out why not. Maybe it's just I got to kick them square in the butt and tell them to lay off the Snickers bars and go up and get some real food. So maybe it's something that I have to do as a leader to kind of push that aspect of their lives. But we don't think about that on the civilian side, because my employer doesn't care if I eat, doesn't care if I slept. Do I show up for work on time, and do I do the job? If I don't, then well, goodbye. So it's an entirely different mentality to get back into the civilian world. So all of a sudden, the folks that are your coworkers, which you trust with your life, I haven't worked a whole lot of civilian jobs where I trusted my coworkers with my life. Barely trusted them with my lunch. So it's a radically different environment. I think that people have to, to move back. When you move from one to another, I think it's just as much of a shock to go from a military setting where I didn't even have to pick out the clothes I wore every day. I just went to my wall locker and opened it up, or my duffel bag or whatever I had at the time, and out came the uniform, and it went on. I didn't have to think about what went on it, because it was a book that told me what went on it. And now all of a sudden, in the civilian world, I got to dress myself. So it's a huge adjustment. Just as much going one way, I think it would another.
What is that like? Say the first time you actually are doing that as a civilian, when it's just like the rules no longer apply. It almost seems like maybe you're dreaming or something, doesn't it?
It really does, and I'll give you an example that a guy told me once. He said, when you get back from your deployment, you're going to feel this silence. And I took that literally when he said it. And it is literal, because my first deployment, I lived off the end of an airstrip. It was the second busiest single runway operation in the world. The single busiest is London Heathrow. So I'm living off the end of a runway less than a mile away. F-16s taking off, landing all hours of the day or night, big cargo planes, helicopters, all that. All of our power is being generated by these banks of giant Caterpillar diesel engines. So there was this noise that happened all the time. And then when I came back home, there was no noise. And I say that, and we talk about very literal things like generators and runways and the sounds that we hear. But it's a very much of an emotional kind of equivalent too. There are all these things that you got to think about, and the stress level is 9.5 out of 10 all the time. And then all of a sudden you come back, and I got to mow the yard today, and I need to drive down to City Hall and pay the water bill. That's my day. So you can imagine just the difference. It's like taking a Ferrari and driving it around the block at 10 miles an hour. It just doesn't feel right.
Well, what I find curious is because a lot of these military guys come back over to the States and they try to get jobs on the civilian side. And for some reason, people cannot understand how the skills you have in the military service can translate and be a benefit, if not a positive asset, to a civilian business. This mindset is something I think we need to change here.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought this up. One of the things that I've been doing this year, just kind of for fun, I haven't figured out a way to get paid for it yet, but I love doing it, so I've been doing it for free. I'll get together groups of employees, executives, HR professionals, get them all together in a room, and we get some panelists in front of them that kind of try to bridge that gap. There are a lot of resources out there for veterans right now. The military has a fairly well-defined, the effectiveness of it, okay, maybe that's hit or miss. But, I mean, it's a fairly mature program that they've got going that says, okay, veterans, you're getting out, you're going to the real world. Here's what you need to know about writing a resume. Here's what you need to know about doing a job interview. We're even going to put you through some of these things in practice. So there are some resources out there for vets. The thing that there isn't are resources out there for employers. People to say, okay, I want to hire vets because, okay, maybe I want to be patriotic. Maybe I just want to appreciate what they've done. Maybe I do recognize that veterans have some skills that they're going to bring to the table. But I don't necessarily know how to get those skills out of the person. I don't necessarily know how to hire that person into the right job. Because all an employer wants to do, they want to put the right person in the right job and they want to keep them there. That's what makes sense to the employer. That's what, hey, that's what makes sense to us too. If I'm out looking for a job, that's what I want. I want the right job that's going to fit my skills, and I want to plan on being there for a little while. Or having, some sort of a clear path forward of saying, okay, I'm going to do this for X amount of time and then move on. So the employers don't always understand the skills that veterans have. Veterans don't often understand how to articulate those skills back to the employer. So what the employers have got to understand is that, okay, well, here's a kid who's 22 years old. He's been on the job a year. He's already very good at his job. In another year, he's going to be supervising other people with that same job. He's going to be moving on. He's going to have a clear path forward. Maybe by the time he's 25, he might have a squad or even a platoon. Well, how big is a squad? How big is a platoon? So, all of a sudden we start speaking this language that doesn't necessarily draw nice, clean lines to connect the dots over the civilian world. Whereas if I could tell them, well, I managed a motor pool with an $8 million inventory and had 23 guys working for me, and we had to do things according to, a specific set of policies, and we were determined to be the best motor pool out of the division, which evaluated 6 other motor pools of the equivalent size. Well, okay, if I say that, it doesn't matter that you don't really know what a motor pool is, because I've told in a way that civilians can understand that, okay, this was about the size of the thing that he did. This was the number of people he supervised. So being able to sort of speak that language, it's not necessarily that civilians need to learn how to speak veteran. Veterans need to learn how to speak civilian and vice versa. So it works both ways. It's been a lot of fun so far doing these seminars and putting this stuff together.
Maybe you should hook up with Concerned Vets for America, because I think they're also doing work in that area too. I've been talking to a couple of them. As a matter of fact, I have one coming down for my Tea Party meeting in September to address our group, to show how we can integrate the veterans into the things that we do. And actually here in where I live next week Wednesday, we have got businesses and veterans getting together to see how we can get the two to mesh together and get jobs for these veterans. So some communities are working in that direction, and I'd like to see a program that can be instituted across the entire United States for all of our veterans to help them. Because, as having been married to a veteran, having worked in the police department, I understand how you have to try to get the two sides to meet in the middle so that we can be beneficial to each other. These guys have the skills that will help private businesses.
Absolutely, and the interesting thing about, and private business does this, the military does this, you've probably heard this a ton of times before. The way that employees get evaluated, whether we're talking about civilians or soldiers or whatever, they always want these quantitative measurements. They want to know how big, how many, how much, or how long, and what did you do, and how does that relate? Give me a representation of the size and the scope of a project that you can handle. And that's kind of what they want, and that's how we're evaluated. because my $8 million project is somewhat of less scope than, someone else's $80 million project. So that's the kind of thing that they're looking for. But the truth is that employers, when they look for somebody to hire, are looking for things that have nothing to do with that. And they can't say that anymore because they're looking for somebody, A, can I get along with this guy? Does he show up for work? Is he drug-free? And does he follow instructions? I mean, that's the basic entry-level requirement for any job. Because I can teach somebody how to do work for me. Doesn't matter what kind of business that I'm in. I don't expect somebody to come into the door and understanding it, but okay, I want them to be able to read the instruction manual and maybe go, take on a task and then come back to me for guidance when they need it. So all of those skills are very difficult to articulate. So when the veteran's sitting there in the chair across from the human resource manager, trying to answer the question, what do you bring to the job? And sometimes the answer isn't necessarily these quantifiable things. Sometimes it's being able to say, well, I get along pretty good with people. That's something that they're looking for. It's hard to define that. Well, how do we measure how well someone gets along with someone? But I show up for work on time. I don't use drugs. I can follow instructions. I mean, all of these things, these soft skills. Maybe it's being able to give a presentation to somebody. And maybe that soldier's presentation skills or experience has nothing to do with what this company does. But the truth is, I can stand up in front of 150 people and give a speech. But just because I've never done that about anything that has to do with the company I'm interviewing for, if I don't believe that that's relevant and I don't tell the employer that I can do that, then they'll never use me in that capacity. And then I'll be wondering, why am I not being utilized? And maybe just nobody knew that was important. So we got to build these bridges. We got to get people together.
When you have studied all this, man, this is beyond interesting. Is there one type of PTSD where like it just seems to kind of be larger than others? I know there's different forms of PTSD, but I always had wondered. Here where I am in Michigan, it just seems like every other week we have, sadly, someone taking their life who returned and was confused. But is there one that kind of stands out where immediately the symptoms just instantly? Yeah, I don't think I'm asking it right, but I think maybe you can get the logistics of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that person that you meet and you have a 3-minute conversation with them and you can tell that they've seen way too much, that's the kind of person that you're talking about.
Yes, you can look at them and just it's
and you just
like
know
in their face.
You just know. And there's all these different things, and somebody that's not necessarily willing to engage, or maybe they engage with anger in places that you think, man, you really need to. The guy that you think to yourself after you talk to him for a minute or two, man, this guy really needs to, rotate a couple of turns counterclockwise so he, can loosen himself up a little bit. And those are the kind of folks that, that are generally at the highest risk level. And when we talk about PTSD, you got the kind of thing that you talk about when someone has had a single incident that is just so bad that it just sticks in their head and they can't get past that. I'm not going to say get over, because nobody gets over anything, but you can get past and, put the life back together. But then there's a second sort of type, and I think we see this a lot in vets, where there may not have been necessarily one incident. It might have been a series of smaller incidents. I would see this a lot of times in my medics. You get people coming in every day, and then sometimes you wouldn't get anybody come in for 3 weeks. And those are the worst things, because then people sit over there and they're like, why on earth am I not doing my job that I set out to do? But it gives people tons of time to think, tons of time to get in trouble. That's actually where we came up with most of the pranks that we pulled to each other in Iraq, was the time that you sit around waiting for bad things to happen. But there's a way to cope. There's a coping mechanism. And you either have that pressure valve or you don't. And if you don't, then the pressure just continually builds and continually builds. And it isn't necessarily one event that sets the whole thing off. It's just this culmination of different things. People, I don't try to get. I'm not a psychologist. I had a couple of college classes in it years ago. even as a nurse, not particularly a touchy-feely guy. I was a trauma nurse. I dealt with, air goes in and out, blood goes around and around. Any deviation of that is a problem that we got to fix. But I didn't really get into how anybody felt. But I would guess that someone who decides to take their own life, it seems to be a very calculated decision. Now, it isn't, because there are some, obviously there are some things that those folks can't seem to take into account. But in any case, I believe that a person feels like that that's the point that they have reached the point of no return, that they're utterly without hope, that nobody gets it. So I think what we have to do as individuals, and vets especially, we've got to take care of our own. Because I can call up a vet right now, I don't care, any place in the Middle East he's served, and within 5 minutes we can be talking about something that both of us understand. Now, it may be the heat, it may be something that had nothing to do with the mission, it might be the food, it might be the kind of tin cans that we lived in, it might be just some other aspect of life. But we're going to make some kind of a connection. 5 minutes, any modern veteran, I guarantee that I can do it. And even with some of these older guys, where my war was entirely, we mentioned Medic Part 1. That's my favorite one in this series, and that's the most recent one I wrote, which makes no sense. But Part 1 was about a World War II veteran. And the first thing this veteran says to me, he says, I don't really know if I'm your guy. Now, I've heard this speech before. It was from my Korean War veteran that I wrote Part 2 about. And both of these guys says, I don't think I got anything I want to tell you. So I said, well, it helped me understand what some of the things that we're like. So we'd sit down and we start talking about Army things, start talking about basic training and some of the things that we'd gone through. And I talked to one old guy that he got a draft notice in the mail, came home from work after being gone for several days, picks up a letter, and he's been drafted. He's got 3 days to show up at the post office. They're going to put him on a bus, and didn't even tell him what service he's going into. Now, when I found out I was going to war, I got an email. So each of us, we shared those stories with each other, and we realized that there really is a connection there. It doesn't matter what time period that you served in. War is war. And just because his was a little different technologically than what mine was, it doesn't mean that we don't share some common threads. So I think as vets, we've got to be reaching out to each other to say, hey, you know what? I got you. If you need anything, you call me. I got a guy I served with 20 years ago who ended up having to haul me to the hospital and, get some unplanned surgery because my wife is gone and I'm basically in the house by myself. This guy hauls me to the hospital, drops me off, comes back and gets me, deposits me at my in-laws, and makes sure that they understand all the instructions that the doc gave because he knew me well enough to know I wasn't going to follow him anyway. I mean, this is a guy that absolutely had my back when I needed him to have it. And it was a small thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be this big thing that you do to somebody. Pick up the phone, call people that you haven't thought of for a while, and just say, hey, man, I was thinking about you and just want to know how you were doing. You never know. That one phone call, that might be the life-changing moment for somebody where they know they're not alone.
Well,
that's just my thought. I think we all got to take care of each other.
I've advocated for this, that when these vets come home, put them in the VA. Let them staff the VA, because no one knows, as you say, what a veteran needs than a fellow veteran. Forget about these private civilians. Just let the veterans run the VA. And then we wouldn't have any of the problems we have today. We wouldn't have people that have already passed away finally getting their appointment with a doctor or a clerk. You wouldn't have a clerk putting a stamp on someone's record, so the next thing you know, there's a knock on the door and there's a cop with a warrant asking for them to turn over their guns. You wouldn't have all these crazy things that are going on over there if just vets took care of vets.
Yeah, and I think that needs to happen at absolutely the highest level. The folks that I work with through the VA, the folks that are on the ground in the ditch doing the work, most of them, and I'll say most because you got issues in any organization, but most of them, they seem to like why they're there. They seem to understand why they're there, and they really want to do a good job. I've gotten some great medical care through the VA. The issue is that the folks that are running that system are clueless. When Secretary McDonald gets on the television and tries to make some sort of a comparison to Disney World, then he's obviously completely out of touch. And what the man said is, so I can put it in context, he basically said, when you go to Disney World, you're not so focused on the length of the lines, but the value of the experience. Well, okay, I'll buy that. Space Mountain better be really awesome if I'm going to stand in line for an hour to get to it. So I get that the value of the experience is important. That's what he was trying to say. He said it in a way that he couldn't even spell eloquent if he tried. But I got the point that he was trying to make. The thing that he completely missed when he said this is something a lot of people are not talking about. This man was hired to fix wait times. And what he basically said 2 years later was that we're not going to focus on wait times. We're going to focus on the quality experience. Great. Focus on the quality experience. I'm happy about that. But you were hired to fix wait times, so you need to fix that too. We can't just stop looking at one problem because it's not convenient anymore. Our Secretary of the VA is completely out of touch. Hasn't really even fired that many people. And he doesn't know how many people he's fired. If you Google it and you ask, how many people have been fired through the VA, McDonald will say one thing to Congress, he'll say another thing to the press, and the numbers will vary all the time, and then he's always going back and changing them. And I read last week that one of the individuals that was responsible for the thing that started it all, the Phoenix VAs, where this whole thing started with the manipulation of the wait times and the fake waiting list and all that stuff. This individual, because of the procedures that VA has to go through to fire somebody, she may never get to work again, but she's going to get a pretty fat severance and some back pay. I don't even understand that. I mean, in my mind, if I steal from my civilian employer and my boss comes in and says, you stole from us, you're fired, clean out your desk and security will escort you out of the building. Okay, well, that seems pretty reasonable to me that that's what would happen. But we have folks that have committed all sorts of grievous offenses in the VA. Had a couple in North Carolina apparently were consummating an extramarital affair in the middle of one of these VA clinics during office hours. They weren't fired. The two individuals that manipulated their own transfer and then took the combined total between these two people was $450,000 worth of moving and transfer expenses that they got the government to pay. But it was because they manufactured the transfer to a place that they wanted to go and then pocketed huge amounts of money. Those individuals, they're not even being required to take the money back. One of them did get demoted for what that's worth, but didn't have to pay back $250,000.
Well,
so we have a system that's that. I mean, you can't fix something if you can't hold people accountable even at the lowest level.
No, you can't. And I've got two co-hosts with me today, so Curtis, go ahead, jump in.
Hey,
Curtis?
first of all, thank you for your service. Can you hear me?
Yeah, got you now.
Yes, I can hear him.
All right. I served in Desert Storm, and I saw the stress level of some of our shipmates. I was in the Navy, and we had a few incidents where some people committed suicide, either by hanging or drinking poison or jumping off the ship into the water and things like that. We hear a lot about suicides once our veterans come home. And I was just curious, did you see any evidence of a lot of suicide in theater over there when you were serving?
There were some self-destructive things that we always wondered, did this person sort of place themselves at risk, maybe unnecessarily, and those are pretty tough to measure. When I wrote Northwest of Eden, I included two different stories about suicides. One of the stories written near the very end of the book was a young man that shot himself with his own rifle, and he was, young kid, maybe 19 or 20 years old. And obviously, he was successful at doing that. And the sort of emotions that swirl around everyone else when one of these things happen is, these are some words that I'll never forget. One of the psychiatrists that was there, was a Navy guy, and he was helping us out. And he got a group of these guys together, right after this incident. He says, I want everybody here to understand something. We're all sitting back here in a group, and we're playing Monday morning quarterback. Every one of you people has a piece to this. You're thinking about the thing that person said to you and whether you should have seen this coming or could have seen it coming. But the truth is that we only know this because we have all the pieces and we have everybody sitting around at the same table and we're saying, yeah, we see now, and it's obvious that this young man was very deeply troubled and at high risk for taking his own life, but no individual saw all the pieces together. So that's something that we don't necessarily talk about, at the level of stress that is just on people, that they don't always hold on to it. Almost always has something to do with home. The second suicide case, it was an attempted suicide, was a young lady that had overdosed on some medication. And I fought tooth and nail to save her life and was able to do it. And I still look back at that. I mean, over 20 years of being a medic, that's still one of the cases that I remember because it turned out well. The young lady was able to, in spite of the fact that her heart stopped 3 or 4 times on the way to the airfield and all sorts of crazy things that were happening at the time, a few days later she was up walking around and breathing on her own, and she was fine, to the point she could start to heal mentally and start to deal with her psychological issues, because obviously there were some of those there. But I mean, it's just something that people don't always. I don't know. We throw somebody into a fire and we expect that they're not going to get burned before they come out the other side. And I think it's something that happens. We've all got to be in tune to it as best we can. We got to connect with each other, And I talk about that like I'm still in. I've been out for 8 years. But it still feels like I haven't thrown my uniforms out yet. They're still in the trunk. I can't bring myself to throw that stuff away. My dress blues are still ready to go.
Well, actually, if you looked in my closet, my uniform's still hanging up too. I still have all my equipment. So yeah, I know the feeling.
It's an interesting part of who we are. So I still speak in the present tense, but it's absolutely something that we have to support each other as best we can. And when you're in the middle of something, everybody's going through it together. You're on board a ship. You're in the middle of a combat outpost someplace out in the middle of nowhere. The one thing you got, there was a chaplain that told me one time, he says, you're never truly miserable unless you're cold, wet, tired, naked, and hungry. I said, okay, it's a pretty tall order. He says, even then, you're probably not alone. Not in this. And I thought, wow. So out of all that, I think that as long as we're cold, wet, tired, naked, and hungry, and we're all together, we're all in the same, position, then there's a certain comfort that comes to that. When everybody gets back home and they get back into their living room again, they're no longer cold, wet, tired, naked, or hungry, but they're alone. And sometimes that's harder than any of the rest.
On a lighter note, did you always work out of a air-conditioned building over there, or were you in like one of those mass settings, like from the Korean War, like on TV?
Basically, everything that we operated looked like kind of a cheap double-wide trailer. Our living conditions, what we lived in, were shipping containers. And the shipping containers would have a door and a window on the end with a little air conditioner in it. And basically, that was a hut for 2 people. So you had a hard floor. You couldn't keep the dirt out. I mean, you know how that goes. But it is basically a sort of a hard shell kind of thing. The bathrooms are in a different shipping container. So everything is all these modular things. When we were in the hospital itself, I mean, we had real floors and we had real walls, but everything looked like a whole bunch of double-wide trailers hitched together. That's kind of what it reminded me of, and walking through it and walking around it. But it was designed, of course, to be able to kind of pack up and fold up and throw it on a plane and fly it across the world if you needed to.
Your book is...
We got out of the tent thing.
Well, your book is very interesting because when you do describe the living quarters and everything else, and you got me with one of those stories where you thought something had died under your quarters, And I was hysterical reading about that.
Yeah, that's one of those stories that just stuck with me. The guys that pulled that, I mean, we were all pranksters, and that's pretty obvious throughout the book. Everybody was trying to just mess with everybody else, I mean, to some kind of reason. But we all know that when things go on like that, eventually it's going to go too far. And this was kind of the point that it did. One of the doctors that was there had gotten a whole box of stuff from his wife. His wife must be a wonderful person because she'd sent him all this stuff from the joke store. So, I mean, he had like this bearded Osama bin Laden wig, and he had like a clown nose. He had all this other stuff, but he also had like itching powder and the little plastic ice cubes with a bug in them. I mean, so she sent him all this stuff, and he just starts using everything and just playing pranks all over the place. Well, he had, in this little box that she had sent him, there was a spray can. It was called Super Fart Spray, and it smelled like the inside of a Kuwaiti porta-john. It was the most foul, wretched-smelling stuff that you can imagine. I'm not even sure it's legal in the United States.
Yeah.
But what these guys were doing, him and one of the other doctors that worked with me, they would walk along, and they knew which one of these shipping containers I lived in, and they walked by and they would just shoot a little spritz of this in the air conditioner. So of course, it's pulling that smell into my room. Well, of course, I go into my room, you know, and it maybe have been several hours, but I can still smell this thing. And I'm thinking, what on earth has it been? So I think, okay, the next time I have a day off, I pull all of my dirty laundry out of my hooch, I mop the whole thing, sweep the whole thing, and pull the wall walkers out. I'm dusting behind everything. Just, and it would smell pretty clean. I'm thinking, okay, well, whatever this is, I got it. And then a day or two later, I'd come home from work, and I'd go, there's this foul smell again. So I'm thinking, have I got some dirty socks someplace? What's going on? I even thought it was coming from my air conditioner at one point. So I pulled my AC unit off the wall, and I took it apart and started wiping it down, thinking something had maybe crawled in there and died, and never could find it. Well, these guys were just sure that I knew what was going on, because they thought there's no way in the world that I could be, oblivious to what they were doing. So they started to have the suspicion that I was planning some kind of retaliation against them. So they were all looking over their shoulder, being all paranoid. I really had no idea. It got even to the point that the night that they left, there were some people that came by to say goodbye to them, and they knocked on their door, and they wouldn't answer the door. They pretended they weren't home because they just knew it was me coming at them with no telling what. And it was unfortunate, but these guys were 5 minutes away from getting on the plane. I had figured out what was going on, and then one of them had gotten inside my living quarters and had sprayed the inside of most of the rest of this can, and had left the can on my pillow. So of course at that point I know what's going on. Well, right before he got off the plane, he had his body armor in one hand, and I reached out to shake his hand, and instead of shaking his hand, I just held on to it, and I reached in my pocket, and with the other hand I sprayed his body armor full of this spray. Which, of course, he was a few minutes away from getting on the plane, so he actually had to get on the plane in 100-degree heat and ride all the way to Kuwait with this awful smell inside of his body armor with him. He still gives me grief about that. He actually works in the emergency room about 20 miles north of where I live. So I do see the guy once in a while. It's just one of those funny memories that we share. Like, yeah, okay, that one probably went too far. But those are the kind of things that they keep us going. I mean, we have to be able to do that dumb stuff to be able to cope with all the really awful things that we have to deal with and see. And at this, and I think at this point, that doctor, as goofy as we are, I trust him when it comes to taking care of a patient, and I know he's going to do the right thing, and I think he trusts me too. And that was the bond that we formed. There wasn't anything going to get in the way of that, not even a can of fart spray.
Oh man, I just loved it. I love that story. Go ahead, Curtis.
I was just wondering, how good are we at saving lives now? People that's been wounded in battle compared to maybe when I was in Desert Storm. Have we made any improvements? in the medical field?
Well, the statistics that we kept were that if someone got to the door and they had a pulse, they had a 99% chance of leaving with a pulse. There were the success rate that we had was just unbelievable, and a lot of that is not necessarily due to the advances in medical care, and of course there are some. I mean, every medical advance that we've learned generally during a time of war, all the way back to the Civil War and even before that. Everything that we really know about infection and germs, it's all been based on real-life experiences of folks in wartime. So every time we go to war, medicine gets better. It's sort of an awful thing that happens as a side effect. But one of the things that we did a lot different in Iraq than what was happening in the Desert Storm time frame, we were teaching truck drivers how to start an IV, how to put on a tourniquet, and how to maintain somebody's airway. And these were things that we discovered that we can teach somebody in 2 or 3 hours how to do all these things. And then they can go out, and then if something happens, then at least there's some basic knowledge of what to do that's put into these guys on the ground. So when there's no medic around, and the guy gets hit, at least, well, okay, we're going to turn this guy over on his side and make sure he's still breathing, and if he's bleeding someplace, we're going to get that stopped. So being able to do just those basic things, it adds to the success rate of the overall. They talked a lot about the golden hour, and the golden hour was something they talked in Vietnam a lot, because they basically said if you get to definitive medical care within 1 hour, you're probably going to be all right. If you don't get it within an hour, you're probably not going to be all right. And what we discovered was that just as important as that golden hour, and they still talk about it, even though it's kind of an imaginary number, they start talking about the platinum 10 minutes, meaning if I can get somebody there who has half an idea what's going on, who can do some very, very basic things in the first 5 to 10 minutes after an incident, then I can save a lot of lives with that. That's the one thing we were doing a lot different in the modern wars than what was happening, even in Desert Storm, which was about the time I came into the Army.
It's really interesting, some of the stuff that is going on in the medical field today and the advances that have gone on. Now, my uncle was an orderly in a MASH unit in Korea, and it's something he never spoke about. The only thing he ever said was, we asked him how close the movie was to reality in it. He goes, pretty damn close. So seeing the advances that have gone through from World War I to World War II to Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, now the war on terror, it is an amazing, amazing advancement in such a short period of time when you think about that. Think how long it took us just to get into a uniform method of medicine in the United States compared to now what we can do today. And it's an amazing feat, that things that you guys do. And I got to say, getting a lot of comments in the chat room about your website, because I've been posting it up in the chat room, and people love your website. So you got a bunch of new fans here.
Oh, great. I'll have to log on to that chat room and respond to some of those comments here in a little bit. But it's people, they love to hear their stories. It's sort of a part of life that a lot of people hear about. It's something that somebody's uncle or grandfather went through, and a lot of those folks, they're not telling the stories. That's one of the reasons that I really wanted to tell mine, is I wanted people to understand what it was like, because that's the biggest thing that veterans talk about when they get back. Well, why don't you ever talk about your experience? Well, nobody would understand. Well, I think we can change that. I think we can get people to understand by telling the stories that need to be told. And we're always going to leave some stuff out. There's nothing that any of us want to drag out of the underside of the closet, and this is just the worst times in our lives. But at the same time, being able to just sort of put a human touch on that. That's what I was really trying to do with the different short stories in Medic, is to define who that person was. In the case of the World War II story, his name is Henry. Henry lives a few miles up the road from me. He's an astonishing man. He's in his late 80s now, lied about his age, forged a document, conspired with his cousin to steal his uncle's notary seal, and they forged a document that he signed his mother's name to, saying he'd been born at home. And he runs off and enlists at the age of 15. 3 months later, this kid is on the shores of Normandy on D-Day, in the middle of the largest amphibian operation in the history of the world. You know, and here I get the chance to sit down with a guy and talk to him about that. I mean, how amazing that is. And it has nothing to do with my service at all, but I get a chance to sit down in the chair across from this man and listen to him tell me stories about what that was like. I mean, that's priceless. You can't put a price tag on that. And we got to be able to do that. We got to hear these stories from these guys so that we can pass them on, because those guys are going to be gone soon.
Yeah, that is truth. That is the very, very God's honest truth. Because right now we're seeing thousands of them dying from the Korean War and now Vietnam War. You know, every day I open up the obituaries. I'm not morbid. I'm just making sure my name's not there yet. But I read some of these stories, and you see that this person served World War II and then served in Korea. And like Henry, served several different theaters. He served in World War II. He served in Korea. He served in Vietnam. And their stories have to be told one way or another. And thank you for doing that for Henry.
Yeah, and they're just amazing stories. And for me, the reward is getting to talk to these people. You know, getting to meet these folks. I met him completely by accident. The only one of the 6 veterans that I interviewed for this series of Medic, there's only one of them that I knew during the time of her service. Everybody else is one guy. I think, didn't he serve in Desert Storm? So I talked to him, and we really started talking about it, and I knew the guy. The other 4 were complete strangers. I met him at random. But the fellow that I got to talk to me for the Part 3 Vietnam, he was a friend of a guy that I talked to when I was on a book signing for Northwest of Eden. And I was talking to this guy, and he's like, yeah, I'm an old Vietnam medic, and I don't want to talk to you, but I know a guy that probably would. He gave me this guy's name, and I thought, well, nothing more of it. And then the guy calls me out of the blue and says, hey, I understand you're looking for somebody and you want to tell somebody's story. And this guy, I could have written a whole book about him. Could have written a whole book about any of them. So lots of fun. It's incredibly rewarding to go to these book signings, and if I sell enough books to pay for my gas, hey, that's great. But being able to meet all these incredible people and sit down and talk to them and listen to their stories, that's the real reward.
Well, you know, unfortunately, only 10% of households, of our families, have someone that serves in the military. It's only 10% out there serving. So, you know, there is a big gap between those of us that are civilians and the military. And having the stories come out can help bridge that gap. So I'm encouraging more and more people to go onto your website to get your books. Now, you are turning Medic, your 5-part books, into a single volume now? Yeah,
it's actually 6 parts. I'm working on part 6 right now, and I alluded to this earlier. I wrote them completely out of order. Each one of the stories stands alone. I mean, if you want to read about a particular war, you can pull up the Vietnam story and read it, and it stands by itself. But I wrote these with the idea that they would sort of be for my ebook market. You know, it's 99 cents. It's a download that you can do right away, and you can read something on a plane if you want. It's about a 45 to a 75-minute read for each one of them, depending on your speed. So it's a great airplane read. And I wanted to be able to put the idea was to put all 6 of them into one volume, and then once I would come out with the paperback of all 6 stories, then I get to do what I love to do, which is go out and do signings. And signings are such a fickle thing, because sometimes I drive for 2 hours to do a signing and I'll sell 3 books. And I haven't, and people don't necessarily want to talk to someone who's out and about. So what I generally do is I just show up to a place and I start talking to people, walking around and talking to the crowd and whoever I've got. And, oh, by the way, I got some books over here. And I do a whole lot better with that. But I've had a chance to participate in Veterans Week in Branson, Missouri. They do a big event down there every year. It's a fantastic event. Usually 20 or 30,000 veterans from all over the country come into Branson. It's a big country music entertainer area, so all the different shows along the Branson Strip sort of do their veteran tribute thing. Everybody's got vet specials. It's all coming out of the woodwork in support of these folks that are coming out. And you just get to meet thousands and thousands of people just by walking around and talking to them. I got a chance to set up a table down there in one of the little marketplaces, and I was there for a whole week, basically just watching people go by, shaking hands, talking to people, thanking them for their service. I got real lucky. They put my booth right next to the Honor Flight people. Honor Flight's it's another amazing cause a person can get involved in if they want, to be able to fly some of our World War II and Korean War veterans up to D.C. in a structured tour and visit the memorials to the wars that they fought in. And it's a fantastic program, so I gotta put out a little bit of a plug for my Honor Flight friends.
Hey, I was curious. What improvements do you think we can make in our service to our combat veterans as far as the medical field? Surely you've seen a lot, and you got some thoughts on that. Or do you think there's a need for any improvements?
I think as far as the battlefield medical care, we've had centuries to figure out how to get that right. I think it's as good now as it can be right now. I think 20 years from now, during the next war, or God forbid, I hope it's not still the same war, but 20 years, 25 years from now, obviously there are going to be some technological improvements. Aircraft get a little bit faster. People get a little bit better trained. So obviously there are some things that we're going to see, and that's going to play itself out. But that system, it takes care of itself. The thing that we probably need to do a lot better, that we could do better today, is when these folks come back and they get into this quagmire that is the VA. The VA's got to figure out how to streamline some stuff. It just shouldn't take so much time to get anything done that ultimately the situation expires and either the veteran doesn't need this service anymore, or has had to seek it somewhere else, or in worst case dies before they can get their treatment. And that's what we got to fix now, that we can fix. So the technology obviously is going to get better and better and better. I think we're already seeing it. We see these kids. They wake up in the burn unit in San Antonio, Texas, and 5 days ago they got hit with an IED. Well, they had to get there some way, and they had to be transported through rotary fixed-wing aircraft. Probably got on one of my rotary wings from the hospital, fly to the airfield, get on a fixed-wing Air Force asset, go to Germany, eventually get on another plane, fly to San Antonio, back to Army land. So, obviously there'll be some changes to that. We got to streamline our process for our veterans the same way that we streamline it for our combat soldiers. We got to reduce the amount of paperwork these guys got to fill out. We got to reduce the amount of time that it takes, and we got to do some predictions. Our veteran population up until 2001 was getting smaller and smaller because we weren't at war. Nobody was going to war, and veterans were dying off. The population was shrinking. Well, it's not shrinking anymore. We keep sending thousands and thousands of young men and women into harm's way. We're making more veterans right now. The system that's in place is already overwhelmed. We've got to fix it. We've got to streamline it. We've got to make it better.
Well, not only that, we now have the problem with the military being socially engineered. They're more worried about allowing transgenders into the military so that the taxpayer will pay for their gender re-identification than making sure that the planes have enough parts, replacement parts, or that the units have enough equipment, or the rules of engagement are so that our men and women are not have to wait to be fired upon before they can fire at the enemy. The stress that is in the current military today, and then when they transition back into civilian life, is unbelievable. And we need more organizations out there that will speak for the vet and advocate for the veterans. Excuse me. I've done some work with the Independence Fund.
Social engineering.
Go ahead.
I got to say this about the social engineering part of it. We've had women in combat since Molly Pitcher, and probably way before that. I served next to a lot of outstanding soldiers that were LGBT soldiers and couldn't say anything about it. This is a lot of times I think we create a problem where no problem existed before. And I know that those individuals experience some discrimination. There's no excuse for any of that stuff. Whether a person agrees with the lifestyle or not. I mean, we're all there. We got a job to do. Let's get it done. I actually had a lot more trouble with soldiers in heterosexual relationships that were outside of their own marriage than what I had with any of my LGBT soldiers ever. So, I mean, obviously there are some issues there. But, you know, we're there to do a job. One of the things, and this is coming from Henry, the subject of Medic Part 1, he believes that the entire civil rights movement of the 60s came out of World War II. And I said, well, what on earth do you mean by that? And he says, well, you got to understand is at the time of World War II, if a Polish guy married an Italian girl, everybody in the town talked. And yeah, the Jewish kids went to school with the Italians and the Irish and everybody else. But then when school was out, they all went back to their little neighborhoods, and nobody really associated with each other. And now I'm not even talking about white kids and black kids now, because I mean we all know what the issue of segregation would have been in the 40s. But he said all of a sudden, there's an entire there's 12.5 million Americans that fought in World War II that suddenly realized it doesn't matter if the guy sitting next to me is Italian. It doesn't matter if he's Mexican. It doesn't matter if he's black or white or whatever. I got to trust this person with my life. And ultimately, we had those 12.5 million people that a lot of them kind of figured that out. So it's his belief that the entire civil rights movement was because a generation of those people came home, and then they had kids. And then they were starting to teach their kids that, you know what, you can play with that kid if you want to. If he's a good kid, go play with him. Have fun. Go kick the ball around. And we didn't have to teach our kids that people that were different were necessarily bad. Okay, maybe he does some stuff you don't agree with, but it doesn't make him a bad guy. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I think we're still progressing as a society to be. I hate to use the word progressive, but we're still making some progress as a society. It doesn't necessarily mean progress has to be a dirty word just because progressive is. But being able to sort of see that society is changing to the good and to the bad. We got to take it all kind of in one deal, but the military is a big part of that, because as a structured society, the military, maybe how we handle things today in the military reflects the direction that society will be headed in the next 20 years.
Well,
so that's kind of thought. I mean, it's not really any answers.
Well, we got a caller in on the line. She raised her hand, a good friend of our show, Sweet Sue from New Mexico. Go ahead, Sue.
Hi. First, let me thank you for your service to our country. I want to backtrack a little bit to what you said about streamlining the VA, and what you said is exactly right. I worked 15 years as an RN in the federal system. What people have to realize where the streamlining needs to go is what happens, whether it's with the VA or Indian Health Services, you put in a request for needed equipment. It goes then to 4 or 5 different people to get approved. Maybe months later you might get what you need. And all of these jobs, they're there so cronies can support whoever it is, they want in. And so that's the number one way that the VA needs to be streamlined. You need to fire and get rid of all of these unnecessary administration positions.
Absolutely. And when we've got somebody that commits an act of malfeasance, the process for firing them should not take a year. I get it. You fire them on the spot. They got 30 days to put their appeal together. You put them in front of an administrative board, and whatever that administrative board says, you're done. Get out. This is the deal you got. Sue us, I dare you. That's what they need to start doing. So being able to streamline those processes, what that does is it creates a better culture at the VA. Sue, if you've worked in healthcare for that many years, and you know that the people that are working next to you can't be fired, how do you feel that makes them as an employee? After a period of years, how do you feel that makes you as an employee? Do you care about your job as much as you did on day one when it really doesn't matter if you do it right or not? I mean,
Well,
maybe you do, but got to speak for the people on the left and right.
Let me tell you a story. Because of some doctors and practices at the hospital I worked in, several patients died. I went to the ethics committee about this. I was told by the medical director when I said, you know, I'm even worried about my nursing license. I was told, well, you don't have to because we'll simply write them a check. This is what it is like. And people who are there, many of the doctors, because they cannot get fired, they do whatever they want. And this has to stop. You're 100% right.
Wow.
Yeah, and as long as we have an employment culture that's like that, it's not going to attract the best and the brightest individuals, even though we have some people there that care a lot about their jobs and want to do it right. Those bad apples are going to get in, and those bad apples you don't have the ability to pick them out, and that just drags everyone down. When you, like you said, you're looking around at your coworkers, and you're seeing that people are doing pretty much whatever they want because nothing bad's going to happen. We got to fix that.
Well, you know, we had really phenomenal doctors who came to my facility wanting to work, but the bad apples were so threatened. They made it so difficult for these doctors. One by one, they drove them away.
That's a shame. And our veterans deserve so much better. They really do. I mean, we've done several different shows on the VA, and Michael Conley with the United States Justice Foundation, he has been going after the VA tooth and nail. And we need people like that just to keep on hammering at it until we finally can get a system in place that helps you guys out there. You know, it's such a disgrace. We give more care to illegal immigrants. We give them the housing. We give them the medical care. We give them the free iPhones. We give them clothing and education. And our veterans are being left out in the cold, and it's got to stop. Let's just hope this election cycle just turns the nation around, Yancy. Yeah, I think we're pinning on our hopes on November.
Yeah, that's not too much solid to pin our hopes to, unfortunately. I think we're going to probably get more of the same. I'm not sure it even makes any difference which party we're going with out of the big two. I fear that we're going to get, it's just going to be the same old thing. But it goes back to fixing a system and not necessarily worried about the broken people that are in it, but you got to fix the system that's broken. I'm not sure politics is any different than the VA in that regard. We need to be able to fire some people.
All right, well, we got enough time for one last caller to come in. Let me bring this individual on the air live. Area code 816, you're on the air live with Southern Sense. You have a question or comment, and to whom am I speaking?
Hey, Annie, it's Thomas again.
Oh, you switched phone numbers. You fooled me. Go ahead, Thomas. We've got 5 minutes.
On the other phone. Okay, actually, I wanted to share with all of you all, and this is kind of relevant to what you're talking about, in a sense that Annie, everybody's aware of what has happened with the police shootings and everything that happened. And I will share this later, Annie, with you another time. You being a former NYPD officer, I thought that you all and everyone can hear this. There was a
Thomas, you just broke up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're breaking up.
Can you hear me okay?
Now you're fine.
Okay, sorry about this. Okay, there was a military helicopter that just went overhead, sorry. But there was a police officer in our state here in Missouri who was shot and injured in the line of duty and was refused help. His spouse was refused help by the Backstoppers organization here in our state, and the reason why they said they couldn't help him was because he wasn't killed. And the reason why I brought that up when we all was talking about veterans, I wanted to bring it.
Thomas, you're completely broke. Thomas, I'm sorry. Your call is so bad. I'm getting like every other word. But we're down to our last 4 minutes, Thomas, but thank you for the call in.
Okay.
Yancy, thank you for joining us. I mean, the show went so fast. Unbelievable. I always have so much fun, and I'm always surprised when I come down to my last few minutes. I'm urging everyone to go to your website, which is your name, yancycrothers.com. There's a link on the show page. So as they're listening in the podcast later on today, they can just click on that link and go directly to your site and get your book, Northwest of Eden, and also get some of the downloads on the Medic series. I'm looking forward to the next release.
All right, I appreciate that. It's been a lot of fun, and thank you for having me today.
Well, and we'll contact you and Bill and see if I can get you down here for a book signing and maybe even address our Tea Party group. Something to look at.
You never know. Hey, can you tell me where the message feed was again for the show? You had mentioned that there were some folks that were commenting on it. I'd love to be able to respond to those.
Right now the chat room is open. If you go into blogtalkradio.com southern-sense, you'll see that it'll say live, and you've got like 3 minutes before the chat room closes.
Oh, okay. Well, apparently I missed it then. So we'll get it next time for sure.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I'll be talking
All right,
to you.
Thanks for having me.
It was my pleasure. All right. I'm in. That is Yancy Carruthers. You got to read his book. I'm telling you, it was riveting. There's so many funny things in there and so many other poignant things in there. And it shows you how he progresses from, first arriving in Iraq and then when he finally leaves. It is something that really educates you as to what our military men and women are going through. So I encourage you to check out his website and read his books. Curtis and Cool Mike, thank you for joining me in hosting the show today.
My pleasure, as always.
Man. And thank you for the callers to Thomas and Sweet Sue from New Mexico. It's always a lot of fun to have you guys with us. So we will be back here on Tuesday, and Paul Sutliff will be in the studio sitting next to me doing the show on Tuesday. And we're going to be joined with Trevor Loudon. Be a great, great show. And then towards the end of the week, we're going to have Dan Perkins and Megan Barth. So we've got some good guests lined up for the rest of this upcoming week. So until then, I tell everyone out there to be safe and have a great weekend. I would say good night and God bless.
If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. Health care plan. Health care plan. Breaking your back.
90 seconds.
When we make our pay tax. Hey, sit down, don't be a jerk. Cause none deserve it better than the ones who won't work. We're gonna throw away what I hope for this road. Use your hard-earned money just to buy a new boat. Welcome to the place. Welcome to the place of left hypocrisy. Little big houses for you and me. Oh, welcome
60 seconds.
Welcome to the face of the new democracy. Here in the land of the not so free. Party night concession stuff for our own cause. We got a pen and telephone to bypass all your laws. Political courageous will replace the civil rights. Support religious freedom, bless you, praise Jesus Christ. The presence in our pockets, so there's no one free. You cannot make a move without the NSAID. Don't expect equality, respect and fair play. The IRS will target those who vote the wrong way. Welcome to the